Struggling cowboy found female Seminole Outcast tied to a tree. The sign said the whites call it. Caleb Turner woke before the sun, as he always did. The air was cold for Florida territory, but the wind still carried a damp smell from the distant swamp. The sky over the flat land was dark blue, and the stars looked sharp like tiny points nailed into the night. His ranch was small, almost forgotten. A few worn fences, a leaning barn, and a water tower that groaned every time the pump tried to work. The cattle count had dropped so low that he stopped writing it down. It hurt too much to see the numbers shrink week after week. Caleb pulled on his boots and stepped outside. Dust clung to the porch boards. In the far distance, the horizon held a faint glow from the settlement, New Canaan, where the council lived behind clean walls and bright lights. Caleb did not go there unless he had to. He checked his wrist screen. Another message from the Galactic Supply Authority blinked in red. Payment due. Property review pending. He sighed and swiped it away. He had seen the same warning for months. The debt was like a shadow that followed him through every day. It had started with drought, then broken equipment, then fees for services he never asked for. It felt like the world was pushing him toward the edge, waiting for him to fall. He walked toward the water tower. The ground cracked under his feet. A few years ago, this land had been green enough to support cattle and crops. Now, even the tough grass looked tired. The water drone should have been running a supply line to the lower pasture, but the lights on its shell were dark. Caleb knelt beside it and tapped the side panel. Nothing. He opened the hatch with a rusted tool and stared at the wiring. "Come on," he muttered. "Don't quit on me, too." He worked for an hour, fingers stiff from the cold, replacing a burnt coil with a spare part he had saved for emergencies. Everything on his ranch was an emergency now. A soft beep sounded behind him. Caleb froze. That beep did not come from his drone. He turned his head slowly. A small surveillance unit floated above the fence line, no bigger than a dinner plate. Its lens glowed a pale blue. It hovered for a second, then drifted away as if it had just been passing by. Caleb watched it until it disappeared into the morning haze. He had seen more of them lately. The council said the drones were for safety, to protect ranchers from raiders and wildlife, but Caleb did not feel protected. He felt watched. He stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked toward the tree line that marked the beginning of swamp territory. A strip of dark green in the distance. It was a place most settlers avoided. People told stories about the swamp. Old Seminole paths, hidden camps, and things the council did not talk about. In earlier times, the Seminole people had lived across these lands. Now only a few remained, pushed to the edges, pressured to register, pressured to accept implants, pressured to disappear. Caleb did not know much about politics. He only knew that every year the rules grew tighter and the council grew richer. He knew that some people stopped coming back after questioning. And he knew he could not afford trouble, but trouble had a way of finding poor men. When the drone finally sparked to life, its lights blinking weakly, Caleb exhaled in relief. He set it on the ground and watched it roll forward, dragging its thin hose toward the pasture. "Good," he said. "Just stay alive, all right." He headed back toward the barn for a cup of coffee, but something caught his eye near the outer path where the fence had fallen last week. A mark in the dirt, footprints. They were not cow prints, not boot prints like his either. Smaller, lighter. And there was another sign, drag marks as if something heavy had been pulled across the ground. Caleb's stomach tightened. He scanned the open land. He saw nothing moving, but the swamp wind blew in a way that made the tall grass wave like hands. He followed the marks carefully, keeping his body low without thinking. It was a habit from his younger days when he had worked as a scout for supply convoys. Back then, survival meant noticing details. The tracks led toward the tree line. Caleb hesitated. He should turn back. This was not his problem. He had enough problems already, but his boots kept moving, slow and careful, until he reached the edge of the swamp. The air changed there. It felt heavier, wetter. Mosquitoes buzzed faintly. The trees stood close together, their roots twisting like ropes. He stepped between two cypress trunks and followed the drag marks deeper, where the sunlight struggled to reach the ground. Then he saw it. A woman was tied upright against a thick cypress tree. Ropes dug into her wrists. Her head hung forward. Her hair was long and dark, tangled with leaves. Her clothes looked handmade, woven fabric, worn leather, and a faded shawl that had been ripped. Her boots were muddy, like she had been running. Caleb's heart slammed against his ribs. He moved closer quietly, as if afraid she might vanish. A wooden sign was nailed to the tree beside her head. The words were burned into it in rough letters. The whites call IT education. Caleb stared at the sign. The phrase made his mouth go dry. He had heard whispers. People called them integration camps, training centers, correction facilities. The council used clean words, but re-education meant something darker. It meant someone decided you were wrong and they would fix you. Caleb's gaze dropped to the woman's neck. A metal tag hung from a thin chain like an ID marker. It looked official, stamped with numbers. He took a slow breath. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the rope. Then the woman's eyes opened. They were dark and clear, not confused, not weak in spirit. She looked at him like she was measuring him, deciding if he was danger or hope. "You should not be here," she whispered. Her voice was dry but steady. Caleb swallowed. "Are you hurt?" Her lips barely moved. "They left me to be found." Caleb looked around sharply. "Who did this?" She did not answer. Her gaze flicked toward the open space behind him, toward the ranch land, as if she could see through the trees. "People who want me quiet," she said. Caleb stared at the burned words again. He felt anger, but it was mixed with fear. Helping her would put him on the council's radar. They already wanted his land. This could be the final excuse they needed to take everything. He stepped back half a pace, breathing hard. The woman's eyes stayed on him. She did not beg. She did not cry. But there was something in her face that made Caleb feel ashamed of his hesitation. He remembered his own life, how the system treated people like him, how the council smiled while squeezing him dry, how the authorities sent warnings like threats. He was not free either, just in a different cage. Caleb reached down and pulled his knife from his belt. It was old with a chipped handle, but it was sharp enough. "I'm going to cut you loose," he said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "If you do, they will come." Caleb nodded once. "I know." He cut the ropes carefully, starting with the tightest knot. The fibers snapped under the blade. The woman's arms fell forward, stiff and shaking. Caleb caught her before she collapsed. She was lighter than he expected. She smelled like swamp water and smoke. Her skin was cold. Caleb shifted her weight over his shoulder. "Can you walk?" "Not far," she whispered. "Then I'll carry you." As he turned to leave, he saw something else nailed lower on the tree, half hidden by moss. A small device like a coin with a blinking light. A tracker. Caleb's breath caught. That meant this was planned. They wanted anyone who helped her to be marked. He ripped it off the tree and crushed it under his boot, but he knew it might already have sent a signal. He carried her out of the swamp, step by step, toward his ranch. The sun had risen now. Light spilled across the plains. Everything looked normal from a distance. Quiet land, quiet fences, quiet cattle. But Caleb felt as if the sky itself had changed. When he reached the barn, he brought her inside where it was warmest. He laid her down on a pile of clean feed sacks and pulled a blanket over her. She watched him the whole time. Caleb grabbed a canteen and held it to her lips. "Drink," he said gently. She took a few sips, then turned her head away. Her hands trembled as she tried to sit up. "Easy," Caleb said. "You're safe for now." She gave him a long look. "Safe is not a place," she whispered. "Safe is time, and time is short." Caleb frowned. "What's your name?" Her eyes softened just a little. "Yana," Caleb nodded slowly. "I'm Caleb." Yana looked around the barn, taking in the tools, the old machines, the broken equipment. Her gaze paused on the small solar charger on the wall, patched together from scrap. "You live alone," she said. "Yeah," Caleb answered. "Not by choice. People don't stick around when there's no money and no future." Yana's expression did not change much, but something in her eyes suggested she understood loneliness. Caleb leaned against a post, trying to calm his breathing. "Why did they tie you up? Why leave a sign like that?" Yana closed her eyes for a moment. "To send a message," she said. "To my people, to your people, to anyone who thinks they can refuse." "Refuse what?" Yana opened her eyes again. "The chip," she said quietly. "The mark they call unity." Caleb had heard about it. The council said it helped citizens access food credits, medical care, travel permissions. But it also tracked movement, speech patterns, and loyalty ratings. Caleb had avoided it because it cost money he did not have and because something about it felt wrong. Iyana's voice stayed calm. "They call it peace, but it is control." Caleb felt a chill. He wanted to say he did not want trouble. He wanted to say she should leave before the council arrived, but the words would not come. Instead, he asked, "Did you escape from a camp?" Iyana hesitated, then she nodded. "Yes." Caleb's throat tightened. "Then they'll be searching." Yana stared at him, steady as stone. "They already are." As if the world heard her, a low, buzzing sound drifted through the air outside. Caleb turned his head sharply toward the barn door. The sound grew louder. A surveillance drone hovered above the ranch fence, its blue lens sweeping back and forth like an eye that never blinked. Caleb's chest tightened. He whispered more to himself than to her, "They saw me." Yana's voice was soft. "You have made a choice." Caleb watched the drone hover, then drift closer. He did not know how this would end, but he knew one thing with painful clarity. He could not pretend he saw nothing. And whatever the council called it, unity, order, re-education, Caleb could feel the truth behind those words now. Something was coming, and it was coming fast. Caleb stood still as the drone hovered outside the barn. Its soft, mechanical hum filled the quiet morning air. Dust lifted from the ground beneath it as it scanned the area slowly, like a silent predator searching for movement. Inside the barn, Yana watched him carefully. She did not panic, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "They are tracking signals," she said quietly. "Not just faces, heat, movement, sound." Caleb swallowed. His heart beat fast, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would not help either of them. He moved toward the barn door slowly and pressed the manual lock. The old metal bar slid into place with a dull click. It would not stop advanced machines, but it made him feel like he was doing something. "Does it know you're here?" he asked. Yana listened to the drone's sound for a moment before answering. "Maybe not yet, but it will search. They do not leave loose ends." Caleb rubbed his forehead. His life had been simple before this morning. Hard but simple, now every choice felt heavy. He grabbed an old cloth and dipped it into a bucket of water, then handed it to Yana. "Clean your hands," he said. "You look like you've been through hell." She gave a small nod and began wiping dirt and dried mud from her skin. Her movements were slow, showing how tired she still was. Outside, the drone drifted away from the barn and moved toward the water tower. Caleb released a slow breath. "For now," he whispered. Yana studied him. "You are afraid." "Anyone with sense would be," Caleb answered honestly. She tilted her head slightly. "But you helped me anyway." Caleb did not reply right away. He leaned against a wooden beam and stared at the floor. "I couldn't just leave you there," he said finally. "I've seen what happens when people pretend not to see." Yana watched him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if accepting his answer. Silence filled the barn for a few minutes. Outside, cattle moved slowly across the field. The drone's sound faded into the distance. Caleb walked to a small stove near the back and began heating water for coffee. The familiar routine helped steady his thoughts. "Tell me about the chip," he said after a while. "I know what the council says, but I want the truth." Yana hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "They say it connects people, they say it protects, but it listens to thoughts, emotions, choices, it guides behavior slowly." "Guides?" Caleb asked. She nodded. "Small suggestions, small changes. Over time, people stop questioning. They forget who they were before." Caleb frowned. "That sounds like control." "It is control," she said calmly. He poured coffee into 2 metal cups and handed one to her. She held it carefully, letting the warmth spread through her fingers. "My people refused," she continued. "We said we would live free even if it was harder. The council called us uncooperative, dangerous." Caleb shook his head. "Dangerous for wanting freedom, that's something." Yana's eyes softened slightly at his words. He sat across from her on an old crate. "So they took you to a camp?" "Yes," she said. "They call it integration, training, re-education, many names, same purpose." Her voice did not shake, but Caleb could see the memories behind her eyes. "What happens there?" he asked quietly. Yana stared into her cup. "They remove your language first, then your stories, then your connections. When those are gone, they offer the chip again. Many accept, some disappear." Caleb felt anger rise in his chest. He stood and began pacing slowly. "This is wrong," he muttered. "Yes," she said simply. He stopped near the barn door and peeked outside again. The drone was no longer visible, but that did not mean it was gone. "They'll come back," he said. "Yes," Yana agreed. Caleb turned toward her. "Then we need a plan." Yana looked surprised by his words. "You do not need to stay involved. You can tell them you did not know who I was." Caleb gave a short laugh without humor. "You think they'll believe that? They're already watching me. My land is under review. One more excuse and they'll take everything." He paused, then added quietly, "Besides, I already chose." Yana held his gaze. Something like respect passed between them. Later that afternoon, Caleb showed her around the ranch. She walked slowly but insisted on moving without help. The sun had risen high, warming the dry ground. From a distance, the land looked peaceful, but signs of struggle were everywhere. Broken fencing, empty troughs, machines patched together with spare parts. Yana stopped near the water tower and examined the control panel. "This is old technology," she said, "but strong." "Old is all I can afford," Caleb replied. She opened a side hatch and studied the wiring. Her hands moved with confidence as if she understood machines deeply. "You know tech?" he asked. "My tribe learned to adapt," she said. "We used old and new together." She adjusted a small component and closed the panel. Moments later, the pump's sound became smoother. Caleb blinked. "You just fixed it." Yana gave a small smile. "It wanted to work, it just needed help." Caleb felt a strange warmth at her words. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, but no rain came. The drought felt endless. They sat outside the barn, watching the sky turn orange. "What happens now?" Caleb asked. Yana looked toward the distant settlement lights. "They will test you. They will offer choices that are not real choices." He sighed. "Story of my life." She glanced at him. "Why do you stay here?" Caleb thought for a long moment before answering. "Because this land is mine, maybe not on paper anymore, but in my heart. My father worked it. My mother planted trees here. If I leave, it's like losing them again." Yana nodded slowly. "I understand." The peaceful moment did not last. A loud mechanical sound echoed from the sky. Both of them looked up at once. 3 drones approached from the direction of New Canaan. Larger than the first one, moving in a triangle formation. Caleb stood immediately. "That's not good." Yana rose beside him, her posture calm but ready. "They are searching," she said. The drones slowed as they reached the edge of the ranch. A beam of blue light swept across the fields. Caleb's stomach tightened. He knew what would come next: questions, inspections, pressure. He turned toward Ayana. "Inside, now." They moved quickly into the barn as the drone lights grew brighter. Outside, a mechanical voice echoed across the land. "Property owner Caleb Turner, please present yourself for inspection." Caleb stopped near the door, breathing slowly. He looked back at Ayana. She stood quietly, waiting for his decision. Fear pressed against his chest, heavy and real, but something stronger pushed back. He opened the barn door and stepped outside into the fading light. "I'm here," he called. The drones turned toward him at once. And in that moment, Caleb realized that helping Yana had changed everything. He was no longer just trying to survive. Now he was standing against something much bigger than himself. The drones lowered slowly until they hovered a few feet above the ground, their blue lights moving across the dry grass like cold eyes. Caleb stood still, hands relaxed at his sides, trying to look calm even though his heart felt heavy inside his chest. A mechanical voice spoke again. "Property owner Caleb Turner, your location has been flagged for inspection. Please confirm your identity." Caleb lifted his wrist slightly so the scanner could read the small identity band he wore. A thin beam of light passed over it, then faded. "Identity confirmed," the voice said. "Remain where you are." Caleb nodded once. He could feel Ayana watching from inside the barn, hidden behind stacked crates and old equipment. He hoped the shadows were enough to keep her unseen. One of the drones lowered closer. A small panel opened beneath it, revealing a round lens that glowed brighter than the others. "We have detected unauthorized activity within this zone," the voice continued. "Explain recent movement near swamp territory." Caleb forced himself to breathe slowly. "I maintain my land," he said. "Fence repairs, equipment checks, that's all." There was a pause, as if the machine was considering his answer. "Your statement is being verified." Another drone drifted toward the barn. Caleb's stomach tightened. If it scanned inside, it might detect Ayana's heat signature. He stepped slightly to the side, placing himself directly between the drone and the barn door. "Is there a problem?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "Routine inspection," the machine replied. The drone's light flickered across his face, studying every movement. Caleb felt sweat form on the back of his neck. He knew he had to stay calm. Fear could trigger deeper scans. He remembered stories from other ranchers, machines watching heart rate, voice tone, breathing patterns. Behind him, inside the barn, Ayana stayed completely still. She slowed her breathing, closing her eyes for a moment, focusing on silence. She had learned long ago how to disappear even when she could not run. The drone turned slightly, as if deciding where to search next. Then a loud crack echoed from the far pasture. One of the old fence posts collapsed under its own weight. All 3 drones turned toward the sound instantly. Caleb blinked in surprise. The distraction was small, but it worked. The machines floated toward the broken fence, scanning the ground for movement. He let out a slow breath. After several tense minutes, the mechanical voice returned. "No immediate threat detected," it said. "Monitoring will continue." The drones rose higher into the sky and drifted back toward the settlement, their lights fading into the distance. Caleb stayed still until the sound disappeared completely. Only then did he turn and walk quickly into the barn. Yana stepped forward from the shadows. "They are testing you," she said quietly. "Yeah," Caleb answered, "and I don't think that was the last visit." He ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "We need to make sure they can't just scan this place whenever they want." Yana nodded slowly. "There may be a way." She walked toward an old workbench where broken electronics lay stacked. She picked up a rusted signal relay and examined it carefully. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "If we create signal noise," she said, "the drones may see only interference, not clear images." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You can do that with this junk?" She gave a small smile. Old technology is sometimes harder to control. Together, they began working. Caleb handed her tools while she rewired small pieces, connecting cables and adjusting circuits. The work gave him something to focus on besides fear. As they worked, Ayana spoke quietly. "When I was in the camp, I watched how their systems functioned. They rely on patterns, predictable signals. When something is too chaotic, they reduce scanning to save energy." Caleb nodded. "So we make chaos." "Yes," she said. By evening, they had built a small interference device. It looked simple, just wires, a battery pack, and a blinking light. But when Yana activated it, a faint hum filled the air. Caleb checked his wrist screen. The signal indicator flickered wildly. "Well," he said, "that's definitely noisy." Yana allowed herself a brief laugh. The sound surprised both of them. It was the first time Caleb had heard her laugh since he found her. For a moment, the weight of danger lifted slightly. They sat outside as the sun began to set, watching long shadows stretch across the land. The sky turned deep orange, then purple. "Why did you refuse the chip?" Caleb asked after a while. Yana thought before answering. "Because identity is not something you trade for comfort," she said. "If you lose your stories, your memories, your language, you lose yourself." Caleb nodded slowly. "I guess I never thought about it like that." She looked at him carefully. "You refused too." "Mostly because I couldn't afford it," he admitted with a small grin. "Sometimes survival makes wise choices without knowing," she said. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden loud sound from the distance. An engine, not a drone this time. A ground vehicle approached along the dusty road leading toward the ranch. Caleb stood immediately. "That's new," he said. Ayana's expression grew serious. "Who comes here?" "Not many," Caleb replied. "Which means this isn't good." The vehicle stopped near the outer fence. A man stepped out wearing the uniform of a local deputy. Caleb recognized him immediately. Deputy Harris, someone who worked closely with the settlement council. Harris raised a hand in greeting, but his smile did not reach his eyes. "Evening, Caleb," he called. Caleb walked forward slowly. "Evening, something wrong?" Harris glanced around the ranch, taking in every detail. "Just checking in. Council noticed increased drone activity in this area." Caleb shrugged. "They didn't tell me why." Harris stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "Off the record, they're looking for someone, an escapee." Caleb kept his face neutral. "Lots of people come through here." Harris watched him carefully. "You always were honest, Caleb, that's why I'm warning you. If you see anything unusual, report it. The council doesn't like surprises." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'll keep that in mind." Harris turned back toward his vehicle but paused. "Things are changing," he said. "Best stay on the right side of it." Then he drove away, leaving dust swirling behind him. Caleb stood watching until the vehicle disappeared. When he returned to Ayana, she was already waiting. "They know," she said quietly. "Maybe," Caleb replied, "or maybe they're guessing." Ayana looked toward the horizon where the settlement lights began to glow. "They will not stop," she said. Caleb nodded. "Then neither do we." He felt something shift inside him. Fear was still there, but it was no longer the only feeling. Determination grew stronger, steady, and solid. He looked at Yana and realized that helping her had given his life new meaning. He was no longer just protecting land. He was protecting choice. And somewhere deep inside, Caleb understood that the next step would be bigger than hiding or surviving. Soon, they would have to stand openly against the system. And when that moment came, there would be no turning back. Night settled over the ranch slowly. bringing a deep silence that felt heavier than usual. Caleb sat on the wooden steps outside the barn, watching the dark horizon. The stars above were clear, but he could not enjoy their beauty. His mind stayed busy, turning over everything that had happened since he found Ayana tied to that tree. Inside the barn, the small interference device hummed softly, sending waves of signal noise into the air. It was not perfect protection, but it gave them time. Time was the only thing they had. Iana stepped outside and sat beside him. She moved more easily now, her strength slowly returning. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "They will come again," she said finally. Caleb nodded. "Yeah, and next time they won't pretend it's just an inspection." The wind moved across the dry grass, carrying distant sounds from the settlement. Somewhere far away, engines roared and lights blinked against the sky. "What do we do?" Caleb asked quietly. Iana watched the stars before answering. "We stop hiding." He looked at her, surprised. "That sounds risky." "It is," she admitted. "But hiding only delays what they want. They use fear to isolate people. If others see the truth, they may stand with us." Caleb thought about that. All his life, he had avoided attention. Survival meant staying quiet, keeping his head down, fixing problems alone. But now things were different. The council already watched him. Silence would not protect him anymore. "What truth?" he asked. Iana met his gaze. "The camps, the chip, the drought manipulation. People suspect these things, but they do not see proof." Caleb felt anger rise again. "You're saying we show them?" "Yes." He stood up and began pacing slowly. The idea felt huge, almost impossible. But part of him felt something else too, hope. "How?" he asked. Iana walked into the barn and returned with a small data chip. It looked simple, but she held it carefully like it was something powerful. "I took this when I escaped," she said. "Records, videos, system logs." Caleb stared at it. "This could expose them." "Yes, but if they find out we have it—" He did not finish the sentence. Iana nodded. "That is why we must move quickly." They worked through the night preparing an old transmitter Caleb had once used to contact supply ships. It was outdated but strong. With Ayana's technical knowledge and Caleb's understanding of the equipment, they slowly brought it back to life. As dawn approached, the machine powered on with a low rumble. "It works," Caleb said, surprised. Ayana allowed herself a small smile. "Now we need to reach people." They aimed the signal toward nearby ranch settlements, small communities scattered across the plains. People like Caleb, independent, struggling, often ignored by the council. The broadcast began. At first, nothing happened, just silence and static. Then Iana spoke. Her voice was calm but strong. "My name is Iana Osceola. I escaped an integration facility. What you have been told is not the full truth," she explained carefully, choosing simple words. She described how the camps removed culture slowly, how the chip controlled behavior, how the council used drought technology to pressure landowners into compliance. Images appeared on the transmitter screen, recordings from inside the camps, data showing weather manipulation patterns. Caleb watched, feeling both fear and pride. "This is real," he whispered. As the broadcast continued, response signals began appearing. Small icons blinking on the screen showing people connecting. "They are watching," Iana said quietly. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky gold. For the first time, Caleb felt like the land itself was holding its breath, but peace did not last long. A loud mechanical roar filled the air. Caleb looked up sharply. A large patrol ship approached from the direction of New Canaan, flying lower than any drone. Its metal surface reflected the sunlight like a blade. "They came faster than I expected," Iana said. Caleb's hands tightened into fists. "We don't stop now." He increased the broadcast power. Outside, the patrol ship hovered above the ranch. A voice echoed through amplified speakers. "Unauthorized transmission detected. Shut down immediately." Caleb glanced at Ayana. She nodded once. He turned back to the controls and kept the signal active. The voice grew louder. "This is your final warning." Yana stepped forward and continued speaking into the transmitter. "They say unity requires silence, but true unity allows choice." Her words spread across the network, reaching more listeners. Caleb saw new signals appear on the screen: ranchers, traders, small towns joining the broadcast. Outside, the patrol ship lowered slightly, its engines shaking the ground. Caleb felt fear, real and sharp, but he did not step away. Finally, something unexpected happened. Another signal appeared, then another. Independent tech groups began interfering with the patrol ship's control systems remotely. Warning lights flickered on its surface. "They are helping," Caleb said in disbelief. Yana smiled softly. "People were waiting for a reason." The patrol ship hesitated, then slowly pulled back, retreating toward the settlement. Caleb stared after it, stunned. The broadcast continued until every piece of data had been transmitted. When it ended, silence returned to the ranch. Caleb sat down heavily, exhausted but relieved. "Did we just change something?" he asked. Yana sat beside him. "Yes," she said simply. Days passed. News spread quickly. Other settlements began questioning the council openly. Independent groups demanded investigations into the integration program and weather control systems. Rain finally returned to the plains, falling softly at first, then stronger. The dry earth drank it eagerly. Caleb stood outside in the rain, letting it soak his clothes. He laughed quietly, feeling lighter than he had in years. Iana joined him, looking up at the sky. "My people say rain is memory," she said. "It reminds the earth who it is." Caleb nodded. "Maybe it reminds us too." His ranch began to recover slowly. Neighbors arrived to help repair fences and rebuild damaged equipment. For the first time in a long time, Caleb did not feel alone. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Caleb and Iana stood near the edge of the land, watching cattle move through fresh grass. "What will you do now?" Caleb asked. Iana thought for a moment. "Stay," she said, "not because I must, because I choose." Caleb smiled quietly. The old frontier had been about survival. This new frontier was about freedom, freedom to speak, to choose, to remember. Above them, satellites moved silently across the sky, but for the first time, Caleb did not feel watched. He felt free. And as the stars appeared one by one, a struggling cowboy and a once outcast woman stood together, knowing they had helped start something bigger than themselves. A future built not by control, but by courage and choice.